Hello, I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes. All right, check 1 2 3 1 2 3. I can really hear you well, Roger. It's as if you are a seasoned professional.
Right. Well, I'm certainly seasoned.
Hey, Roger, you want to know something before we start here? It is good to see you, man.
I'm sure it is.
When your picture came up here, I thought, oh, there's my buddy.
I wish I could say the same, but my buddy won't buy a camera.
So I'm telling you, save that stuff for the podcast, man.
I'm still thinking they're not available yet, Roger.
Yeah. All right. And I'll go 3, 2, 1, start. And then you go ahead and open up.
All right.
And then we'll just take it from there. I'll chime in with you there and everything.
Okay.
Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
Hi there. Roger Dykes here with Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Guess what? We're back.
Oh, man, are we back.
And can you hear all the applause?
I'm telling you, Roger, I've got this big, giant color screen in front of me here at our studio here, and you never looked so good. You are you apparently spent time in makeup before we went on.
I have a much smaller screen in front of me showing nothing of you, but you look just as good as you did the last time I saw you. Or didn't see you, as the case may be.
There are actually people who may be listening to this show for the first time, and we might go ahead and explain to them that this show has been on hiatus, and it is totally and completely my fault. I'm the one that caused this mess. And you never got sick, did you?
No, sir, and I'm not planning on it.
Well, it's good. I don't remember planning on mine either, but it came and got me.
Think how far ahead you would have been if you had planned it.
Roger, I just wanted to take a moment with your blessing, sir, and thank all of the people from Roger Dykes Just Saying and our listeners and your listeners, actually, Roger, who were so kind to voice concern about me during this time. And if I may, I want to tell you, I was one of those that I didn't, of course, pass away, but I tell people I could see the Jordan River from where I was laying there in bed. And I felt myself making a conscious decision, I'm not ready to go yet. And but it is a terrifically horrid experience if you're one of those that COVID really comes and gets you and not only messes with your respiratory system, but also, dare I say, with your brain. And we had that happen, and it was very unpleasant for a time, but there were so many people thinking and praying about myself and my family and the folks taking care of me, and which you were one of. You checked in on me regularly. In fact, I forgot how many times I said, "Is that Roger? Don't answer it." That's what I did most of the time. But but I really appreciate you, Roger, and thank you for being patient with me.
Well, there was much concern from myself, but also I got emails and I got phone calls from people saying, where are you and why aren't you on the podcast? And I'd say, read the Facebook. It says that Michael is ill and they were worried about you, concerned about you, and they were glad to hear when you were able to recover and that we're back on the air again. So,
well, and I am good. You might find my voice a little gravelly still. And I have a little bit of a cough left, but that's, I understand that's kind of normal. That strings out for a while.
Well, the bigger concern I have is that you said it messed with your brain, and I'm thinking now you'll blame COVID for everything.
Oh my God. I tell you, it does. It goes in rooms, and just when it leaves, the lights are just shut off. It takes you a while to figure out how to make things work. And I don't know. We probably don't want to get off on that or spend too much time on that.
Well, we just want to make sure that everybody knows that you're well and back and functioning, and we're also very thankful for that.
And I appreciate that. And the other thing is, for heaven's sakes, take it seriously. Do what you got to do. And now, son of a gun, there's a vaccine. And so a lot of you folks can benefit from that, hopefully. And
well, at least you don't have the problem I had growing up. I know, but not the vaccine. The fact that my mother and dad would set me next to people with walking pneumonia, hoping I would catch it and start walking.
Oh, Roger. Oh, that famous quick-witted Roger Dykes humor. You didn't lose it, and that's good. Roger, you and I talked a little while before we went on, and which is a tremendous amount of prep for you and I to just at least talk for a little while before we go on. But, man, you were right in the middle of talking about things that were distressing you, and with good reason. I think anybody listens to you for any length of time, they figure out really the truth about the ins and outs of your situation and your dealings with trying to communicate with the government, the state government in this case, here in Texas. And man, we don't want to go back in and talk about everything all over again, except to say that we might mention briefly again at the beginning of this podcast that your world, where all of that's concerned, just in the last couple of weeks has changed again. And while we don't want to go into all of it right now because it's still playing out, we agreed it's not time to talk about that yet on the show. Yet, could you just give us a little bit of a sneak peek about what's happening right now and what your feelings are towards that?
Well, the program I'm on, the class program, the CDS class program, just January the 1st began using a time clock system for timekeeping for the pay for my caregivers. Before that, we'd used pay sheets or time schedules that we filled out and they signed. With the coming of the time clock, everything is far more precise and far more regimented, which the government wants because they're concerned that people are trying to cheat or using Medicaid fraud in the sense of that. But as it turns out, this new system has come in. It is very, 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 of course, time-consuming, especially having to learn it on the fly, basically, and hopefully getting everything correct so that the caregivers get paid what they richly deserve.
Right.
So I have been dealing with government, trying to understand how to use it, how to teach my people how to use it, but because of the way things worked out, this program, this part of the program, started on January the 1st of this year. That is not the time to start a new program a new government program because obviously no one is in their offices.
It kind of left you dangling.
Any of those kind of words you want to use, because I'm trying to do what they're asking me to do.
Just a second here, Roger. Let me ask you something. On behalf of our listeners on this show, and they haven't heard from you in a while, since I think the last of October or something. And now your podcast is back every 3 weeks, usually released on Wednesday. But Roger, the thing is, you're saying all this, and on behalf of your listeners, so they're changing this system up. So perhaps Roger Dykes is not quick to embrace change. I mean, there's all kinds of things they could be thinking. Why should they care? Now, this is kind of brutal, but why should they care? Because, Roger, if your people are still being paid the same, but the system is different, how you acquire those funds to pay those people, why should they care if the system is different? And what could be the fallout from this happening at this time? And what are from your point of view, the bad things that could happen and the disruption that could take place because of this? Can we talk about that now?
Sure. Well, as a general rule, in healthcare situations, home care situations, you're dealing, you're dealing with professional caregivers who this is their life work, and they have gone to school or they've been trained to do this kind of work. They walk in, they see a time clock situation. It's nothing new to them. They're used to it. Just like any other business, you go in, it has a time clock, you use it, you don't think about it.
For instance, at a hospital.
At a hospital or a police station, wherever it may be, you clock in, you clock out. Okay. But with the class program, much of the class program, many of the caregivers in the class program are family members of the individual who needs the help. So you've got mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and all these people helping to take care of and being paid for their services. Well, with the timesheet, it was fairly simple. You could put the numbers in, and they signed the timesheet, and everything was fine. With the time clock, if they do not clock in on time, if they don't clock out on time, their pay changes accordingly. And many people, and even my caregivers, many of them are what we will say technologically challenged, in that they are older people. They're not used to this. They never saw anything like it before. So they don't always get it right. The problem being that when the paychecks come, if they don't do it right, their paycheck varies considerably or doesn't come at all because things were left off. So as a result, I then have the ability and the authority to check what they're doing and make corrections as needed. With several caregivers that I'm having to do this with, it's a challenge then for me to constantly be checking and making sure that everything's done correctly so that they don't get shorted or end up with more money one week and end up without any money another week.
Okay, Roger, let me move through this a little quicker. Let me get you to the bottom line here. The bottom line is, unfortunately, and this is just a fact of life, and it's not just with you, Roger, it's with people in your condition all over the country. Unfortunately, the truth is, if someone is working for you and this is their full-time income, this is what they do, and if all of a sudden they're shorted, just for the sake of this discussion, $40 or $50 in a paycheck, after that happens a time or two because of while heretofore you had an understanding, they had a situation with their kids, or they had a sick spouse, or that's the thing, they could come in a few minutes later, or an hour, or even two later, and work and still accomplish all the things that needed to be accomplished. There was a constant flux that you would need to be able to take care of them and keep them on board with you, where now you've created a situation with this new thing where they will, and there's no nice way to put this, they'll quit. They'll walk out. The problem with that is they're not like giving you a 2-week notice. They will quit. They will walk out. And when they do, you are literally left without care, which means you can't leave your wheelchair, or you can't get out of bed, or you can't go to the restroom, or you cannot prepare food to eat, or you cannot prepare a drink of water, and so on and so forth. Things that you have handled and taken care of all your life, but you can't do without a caregiver. So many different things where a caregiver needs to be there. And nobody's arguing that. But to have a caregiver walk out and not be able to immediately replace them, which you can't, because the antiquated ways that they have maintained your lifestyle and income have not been revised to keep up with the times that we are living in, then you can literally be left abandoned in your home.
That would certainly be a possibility, and one of great concern to me, of course, and that's why I'm so concerned in trying to make this system work, since this is what we're facing. My hope is that they will see the fallacy of this program for what it is, and let me try to be brief in telling you what the fallacy is. In order to sustain a person the way I'm being sustained by caregivers, there has to almost be a family understanding, because family is supposed to be doing this. So my caregivers are treated as best I can as though they were related to me, as opposed to just hired workers. The point being that when you live in a world of a family, people don't always do everything precisely on the minute, or precisely even within a 15-minute time period. So you have late, early, off, on, or you can have someone who comes in early and then needs to leave early. That's understandable. You can work that with the time clock, unless they forget to clock in or they forget to clock out.
And still, to be fair to everybody, it needs to come out to exactly 40 hours a week, week in and week out.
Absolutely. It has to come out to that time. This is not like a lot of other businesses that, well, if the cook doesn't arrive at the restaurant at exactly the right moment, there's someone there can probably go in and cook the eggs or the bacon or whatever.
Get the water boiling.
Or get the water boiling. But there is nobody here but me unless there's a caregiver here. So if the caregiver is late or if the caregiver is held up, I can deal with that. What I can't deal with is trying to get their money back to them that they're going to lose for not clocking in and clocking out on time.
Now, I don't think either one of us thought we were going to go this far into this issue on this podcast, but we have. And I would just like to say at this point that there are so many what ifs and what nows. Like, for instance, there are people who are not completely familiar with Roger and have not maybe listened to past podcasts enough to realize that he is a contributor to his community in so many ways. Excuse me, there's that hoarseness I was talking about. But Roger, here's the thing. Anyone who knows you or spends any time around you knows that you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in so many areas of your life, and you are an appreciated member of your community. That said, there are simple solutions that we don't even have time to completely go into now, and that's not what we set out to do on this podcast, but at least this episode. But there are solutions, and rather than going into all of them now, wouldn't maybe the main concern now be to get someone at the state capitol of Austin, and yes, there is a world pandemic going on. Yes, there has been a very challenging election take place, and there is a lot of upheaval and turmoil that I don't think will just disappear in the next 10 days. Anyway, the point is, Roger, it is getting someone of any significance to just listen to you. Would that be fair?
I would appreciate that audience very much, that opportunity very much, because I do have ideas and I have suggestions. I don't know certainly all the ins and outs of the legal aspect of what I would recommend, but there are a number of things that would be far better than the current system. I expect within a few weeks, possibly by the next time the podcast goes up, who knows, that the state of Texas may decide to go revert back to the way they were doing it, as opposed to this new way, until they get more of these bugs worked out.
Well, folks, you mark that down that Roger just said that, because that is completely a conjecture. But Roger Dykes, as much as anyone I have ever met in my life, is got a pretty solid average on predicting what the state is going to do next on several situations. And so that would be interesting, Roger, if and telling if in the next 2 or 3 weeks they reverse this whole thing.
It could happen. I think that they're going to, my theory is based on this. I have experience with computers since 1985. I have experience with computer programs shortly after that. So I have a track record of knowing how to operate computers and what they do and what they don't do. I figure if I'm having as much trouble as I'm having, when you expect people with less experience and more challenging situations than I have that way, I cannot imagine this working very well anywhere, because as a general rule, well, in fact, I was told a few days ago that compared to the rest of the people working with this company, I am, quote, ahead of the curve by a great deal. If I'm ahead of the curve at this point with all the issues I've got, I can well imagine what the rest of the group is having to deal with.
Well, I think that is pretty interesting. I think when you and I started this episode of this podcast, we didn't know we were going as far up this trail as we do, but that happens quite often with you and I. And I think maybe it is well said that we bring our listeners up to date, in that on top of everything that this podcast talked about, and any of you who are just now listening can go back in the library and hear all the other things that Roger has mentioned and the things that he's dealing with right now in today's time. That now, since we have been on hiatus on this program, all of this has just happened in the last few weeks, and Roger's been in the middle of figuring out how it can all work. And
I would also like to add, Michael, that in the middle of all of this turmoil that we're dealing with, Lubbock was blessed with a snowstorm.
Oh yeah, can I just say something about that?
Sure.
Roger and I knew that snowstorm was coming, like everybody else. And the night before it was just about to roll in, Roger and I were talking on the phone. Now, the last time there was a snowstorm like that, Roger got abandoned by his caregivers because they just couldn't get to him. And he went through a heralding about 36 hours of being in his wheelchair, setting up, not able to go to bed or go to the bathroom or get something fresh to eat or drink and that sort of thing. And he simply waited through the blizzard to receive the attention he deserved and needed and pays for. And So Roger and I began to talk, and I said, Roger, is everybody committed to coming in? And he said, well, I think so. Then let me fast forward to the end of it, and Roger and I are talking after the storm has blown over, and he says, well, this time everything worked. We were going to make a whole podcast out of all the heralding things that he had to go through in that blizzard, and the truth of the matter is, this time, his caregivers got through to him.
Well, all but one, but the one that called in and couldn't come, we had a replacement for that individual, so it still all worked out fine. The difference, of course, was not of our awareness of its coming, but of the severity and deepness of the snow. We just didn't have as much snow this time, fortunately, as we did the previous time. So my caregivers were able to get out of their houses and get in their vehicles and come over here. So it all worked, and I'm very thankful and I appreciate all their help.
We are too, Roger.
And their willingness to drive on potentially slick streets to get here. Just so the listeners know, my caregivers do not live next door. They are several miles away. In fact, two of them are living in a town northeast of Lubbock. And so it's not like they can just hop over and come take care of me from next door. They're quite a distance away. Not the way I would have planned it, but that's the way it works out when your caregivers live in another, they're close, but in terms of proximity to me, they're not very close.
Well, finally, Roger, we're just about out of time on this one. We want to thank all of our listeners for joining us again on Roger Dykes Just Saying. And Roger, just in the short time that we have left here, what did you do all of this time? How did you stay productive, and how did you keep yourself busy these last few weeks?
Well, I did a lot of reflecting, Michael, and I was remembering back to the time my parents sent me to camp. And now there are many good, wonderful camps for handicapped children in Texas. The Lions Club camp is one of the very best.
Well, that's good.
It's a very enjoyable situation. Unfortunately, my parents didn't send me to that camp.
Oh.
No, they sent me to a different camp. It was cheaper. It was, well, I think just the location of it might give you an idea of the situation. It was between Cripple Creek and Battered Boulder, just north of Wounded Knee.
Oh man!
And it was.
And this was a camp for the handicapped,
right? And those were the parameters around the camp. So you kind of get the idea right off the bat that maybe this didn't turn out quite the way people would have wanted it to. Now, I have many stories about...
Your parents were always trying to help you out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They were cheap, but they always wanted to do... They wanted me to have the same kind of experience as other children had. So, but unfortunately, they just didn't send me to exactly the right camp. We don't have time now to go into all the different things that happened at the camp, but in a later podcast, we'll pick it up, and I'll give you some of the details of my harrowing experience at the camp between Battered Boulder.
Roger, I am so pleased you have not lost your sense of humor, and we want to thank our listeners for joining us again. We'll be back in 3 weeks with the next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin.
So long.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to Roger Dykes rogerDykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.